U.S. President Donald Trump has signed an executive order that will impose a 50% tariff on a wide range of Canadian goods, a dramatic ramping up of his trade war against this country. And it's all in response to what a senior White House official described as Canada's retaliation against U.S. trade policy and Canadian discrimination against U.S. motor vehicles, dairy and alcohol. The Power Panel is here in the studio to talk about this escalation. Kate Harrison is a conservative political analyst. Laura D'Angelo was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Rob Russo is the Canada correspondent for The Economist. Nice to see you all on this busy July Monday. Rob, I'll start with you. We're seeing new tariffs being in place in 30 days if things don't go according to plan. And if we can't get them off our goods, wide range, another list of things that the Americans want to hit with ever higher tariffs. What do you make of this development today?
A couple of things. If we were wondering if our accommodation was going to get us anything on the Gordie Howe Bridge, what it got us was a Gordie Howe elbow in the teeth. That's the first thing it seems that we can pull away from this. The other thing we can pull away from this is that things, when they're bad, can always get worse. We should always assume that they can get worse. And between now and the time that we come to an agreement, I also believe we are going to come to an agreement on CUSMA, they will get worse. We should take note that there is a 30-day delay at a minimum before these tariffs, if they go into place, So that's negotiating time. I think it's an attempt by the Americans to find out how serious we are about negotiating. There has been the accusation that we have been dragging our feet at times in terms of negotiation in order to get to the midterms. A lot of people think that that's a smart strategy, and it might be an attempt to get us off that strategy. If Canada was looking for levers that they could pull, they're right there in the exclusion. What's been excluded from these tariffs? Energy, potash, fertilizer, fish, and critical minerals. Those are clearly our levers. Will the Prime Minister choose to pull on some of those levers when it is repeatedly pointed out that we are the only country besides China to have retaliated against U.S. tariffs? I'm not sure that he's going to have much choice, but before he pulls on those levers, I'm sure the 30-day exhaustion period will be a time of intense discussion.
Kate, what do you make of this? I mean, he's drawing on Section 338, which is a Depression-era law to oppose these tariffs. They've never actually used this lever before. 50% tariff on a different set of Canadian imports covering products ranging from wine to hockey sticks to cement. I was reading the long list earlier on the air. Long list of alcohol. Cement is in there. I mean, it's kind of a strange list of products that are now facing a 50% tariff, but obviously they're ramping up the pressure on us. Our negotiations to this point are not bearing fruit, I guess you could say, because now we're faced with yet more tariffs on goods that matter to this country and the people that produce them. How are you feeling knowing that there's more trade action now hanging over our heads after today?
Well, it's better to be operating from a position of strength than it is under direct threat. And when you consider how bad the current tariff regime is, the Prime Minister said, this is the worst economic crisis since the Second World War. Now that we are having an addition of any tariffs, even if, to the earlier guest's point, if they might be on industries that are perhaps small, though cement is certainly not one of those industries. No. But, that is a making worse of our tariff reality and our economic reality. And I think the outlast strategy that has been deployed by the government is proving to be a failure. Some of the irritants that have been raised, dairy, auto, alcohol, those are the same list of irritants that the U.S. raised at the outset of discussions. So we can continue to twist on every Truth Social post and, try to make the moral argument and get really caught up in the rhetoric of the day. But really the negotiating position from the U.S. on those key irritants hasn't changed. They're the same things that Canada was willing to play ball with back in October. And so the Prime Minister needs to be asked pretty clearly now, what is the strategy, what is the approach now that we've got effectively a political crisis and an economic crisis ticking over our heads?
Yeah, I want to read a statement from Ontario Premier Doug Ford. He just put this on social media. He says, "I'll never stop fighting to protect Ontario. If these tariffs proceed, Canada should respond tariff for tariff, dollar for dollar." What do you think, Laura? Do you think we should respond dollar for dollar to these tariffs? I mean, we're literally just processing this list. We don't really know the extent of the economic damage, but more tariffs to come. We know what happened in the Trudeau era. You're familiar with that. We did respond with retaliatory tariffs, right? We hit back. We said, okay, you're going to come at us with 25%. We're going to put 25% on your products. Do you think that that's something that we should be doing in this instant as we face yet another threat of tariffs in 30 days?
I think you highlighted a really key point, which is we actually don't really know the scope yet, right? We need a lot more data about what this is going to mean. I think Kate used the key word, which is economic crisis, right? This is about to be an economic crisis if these actually take place in 30 days. And so it's tough to say if they should hit back dollar for dollar. I think it's interesting that Doug Ford is the one coming out and, putting on his Captain Canada cape again. And it's, a privilege he is allowed because he's not the prime minister, because he isn't the one who has to negotiate that day to day and come up with that solution. And I hope the prime minister uses that as a foil, right? Doug Ford taking that role, taking that stance as Captain Canada, gives the prime minister some cover here to do the behind the scenes work that has to happen to hopefully avoid these 50% tariffs ever taking effect in 30 days to begin with.
Yeah, Rob, I just want to read you something that's coming in from Ambassador Greer, Jameson Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative. He says, while the administration continues to secure fair and reciprocal trade deals with our trading partners, Canada, unlike other partners and allies, continues to retaliate against the United States for its efforts to rebalance trade and protect U.S. industry and national security sensitive sectors. Today, President Trump took decisive action to hold Canada accountable for its retaliation and discrimination, delivering on his promise to correct trade imbalances and ensure fairness for American workers, farmers, and businesses. So obviously they're committed to these. This is something that Greer is pushing, which is perhaps no surprise. He is a protectionist. He has been the lead on these tariffs right to this point, although I know the Commerce Secretary is involved, as you mentioned earlier. Are you worried that there will not be a de-escalation to this? Because all signs seem to point to things are not actually getting much better. In fact, they're getting worse now, if we're to believe some of the rhetoric that's coming out of the White House.
I didn't hear Ambassador Greer mention American consumers who are going to have to pay the price for these tariffs if they come into effect. We are a long way. Was it Shakespeare who said between cup and lip, much of our drink has to spill? Yeah. A lot of spilling going on. Is this a blast of Donald Trump's nostrils? Or is it really the first shot in a trade war that we've already been in? Yeah. You mentioned Premier Ford earlier. He's an interesting case. And the auto tariffs, I think, are fascinating. The auto industry in Ontario, where it's centered, is gasping for breath now. Mm-hmm. Is this an attempt to suffocate it? Yeah. Because we've already got plants idled. We already have shifts that have been shut down. We already have, tens of thousands of people who've been laid off. I think what this is probably about, is another shot at Canada's arrangement with China to bring in some EVs, where the Prime Minister told Donald Trump that 49,000 were coming in, being a little bit economical with the truth, because the truth is it's up to 70,000 that are going to come in. Yeah. And the idea is to get Chinese assembly plants here within a 3-year period as well. So there's still some digging in to find out what this is really about. I think we should be relieved that he no longer seems to be holding the Prime Minister accountable for the divine powers of wind currents and lightning-caused wildfires. Look, this is the beginning of some very difficult negotiations between now and then. What we've learned with the Gordie Howe Bridge is every assumption that we have made about trade with the United States needs to be violently tossed out the window if you're Donald Trump, but tossed out. And we need to begin again. And the goal remains for Canada to secure the lowest cost possible access to the most lucrative market in the world. It's become more challenging, but nobody thought it was going to be easy.
Kate, what are you thinking? These are, as Rob points out, hitting some of the most sensitive sectors that are already kind of limping along. I don't know if liquor is, although I think that's doing all right. But, we're talking about more action on motor vehicles. Yeah. This is already a sector where we've seen plants idled or closed, people being laid off. We know that exports have dropped dramatically. We know that when car makers are considering a new plant to build, they're not thinking about Canada, right? They're certainly not thinking about us now. I mean, they're trying to put the pressure on sectors that they know are politically sensitive. We took that strategy in the last Trump administration, as Katie mentioned off the top of our show, targeting playing card makers and swing ridings where Republicans were in trouble. Now they're going after some of the sectors that are most concerning for us, right? Yes. We know that motor vehicles is hanging on by a thread, right? Yeah. And now they're kind of tightening the screws. How does this play out? Do you think that there needs to be more aid for this sector? Do you think we just kind of get down to business and negotiate with them before we avoid them entirely in 30 days? Like, where do we go? What would you counsel the government to do at this point as they're staring down really what is a bad case scenario?
Yeah, I think the advice would be pretty consistent with what a lot of Canadians wanted from the government early on, which is to have the Prime Minister follow through on his promise to get back to the table and try and secure a better deal. It's not to suggest that that hasn't been thrown some curveballs from Donald Trump, and I'm not suggesting that he's a predictable negotiator. But in terms of the list of irritants, that should not surprise anybody. What should surprise Canadians, and I think concern Canadians, is that this hope as a strategy that the midterms might reveal something different, or that maybe the U.S. would grow distracted, like that has clearly failed. Yeah. What is happening now is the U.S. applying pressure ahead of their political cycle to try and extract whatever concessions they can from Canada. And when you have, just yesterday, the Prime Minister all smiles at FIFA with the President to get kicked in the teeth today, as he has been, he has some serious questions to answer. To your point on bailouts and incentives, we've been propping up a number of industries in Canada for the last 14 months as a result of tariffs. I believe part of the discussion today is increased aluminum tariffs above and beyond what are already on the table. We cannot keep giving taxpayer bailouts to make up for the Prime Minister's inaction to actually get to the table and find a workable deal, which I might add is in the interest of both countries. This is not about giving into whatever the U.S. actually demands of us. A stronger trading relationship between the two countries and that predictability is vital and necessary for Canada's economic success. I would say that is the case for our dairy industry as well. They're not looking to take all the quota. I think a lot of consumers might like some access to other dairy products, for example, from other countries. But we can't continue to approach things the way that we have been, because clearly that is not meeting the moment.
Laura, do you think it was a mistake to leave the alcohol off the shelves for as long as we have? Because now that's what they're citing. That's what Jamieson Greer is saying. Well, 10 of the 12 provinces have left American booze off the shelves for so long, and we have no choice but to hit back. I mean, they're leaving out the reason why the booze is off the shelf in the first place. It's not like we just came up with this plan out of thin air. We're obviously responding to what they've done to us. But was it a mistake, maybe, to keep the booze back for as long as we have? Do you think that maybe we should have put it back and played nice with them and tried to broker a deal? Or was it the right move to kind of stand our ground? Because we've kind of folded on a lot of other things that were in place, right? I mean, Carney has dialed back some of the retaliatory tariffs. He's dialed back some of the things relating to the digital services tax. We know that on the Gordie Howe Bridge, obviously we cut them in on some of the future net revenues that will come from that project. But the one thing we have not caved on at all is the liquor. Should we have? Do you think that would have been a prudent decision?
I don't think you can have it two ways, right? I think if you want elbows up and you want a government that is standing up for Canadians, which Canadians clearly indicated they did want.
That's what they want.
Then you do actually have to stand up in some of those areas. Right now, alcohol happens to be the way that is manifesting. It's also because that is not being decided by the federal government, right? That is a province by province decision. And that means that you have to discuss that at the First Minister's meeting. Maybe that's going to be a topic tomorrow. You have to have conversations and negotiations nationwide about that. But I do think you have to take a look at the list of things Canada has put on the table. You just outlined some of them. The list of things that we don't know Canada has put on the table yet, because they've been very, very diligent in not negotiating in public. Yeah. And
we know so little, frankly.
We know very little about it, and that is a whole other conversation around the communication strategy. But we do know that what the U.S. wants out of these trade negotiations and out of these trade deals is not a mutually beneficial agreement. They want an agreement that benefits the U.S. almost exclusively, and we have seen that with the other agreements they've signed with other countries. And so, yes, Canada absolutely needs to be at the table. They need to be figuring out the right concessions, the right levers, as Rob suggested earlier, to use and where they are willing to use them. But that does not mean capitulating on every single item on the table, because that will also be a disaster for Canada.
Well, and arguably, just to add in really quickly, the capitulation and piecemeal approach has also not worked. It happened with DST. We dropped retaliatory. You know, there's been a series of caves that have happened.
Might work on the bridge. It might work on the bridge. I mean, Pete Hoekstra today, the U.S. ambassador, was saying it's going to open Friday. Some sort of ceremony will take place before traffic rolls on Monday.
At what cost?
At what cost?
Exactly.
You know, there's not many examples, to your point, of all these concessions actually producing meaningful results.
No, we're kicking the can down the road to try and, you know, demonstrate some good faith here and there without actually doing the hard work of coming together with a real deal, because, to be frank, that's going to be a tough negotiation. It's going to be tough to emerge from that conversation. Any different than many of the other countries in the world that have a baseline tariff and that don't talk about those industries and politically sensitive industries that have been mentioned many, many times by the U.S.
Rob, would you roll over at this point on the liquor, on the retaliatory tariffs on autos, on the retaliatory tariffs on aluminum to try and get them to avoid putting these higher tariff rates in place? Like, to Kate's point, we've dialed things back and it hasn't produced many results.
Yeah, we've backpedaled so diligently that we have windburn and nothing else from the backpedaling. Let's remember why Mark Carney was elected. He himself has said, no Donald Trump, no Mark Carney as Prime Minister. So I don't know that he can backpedal much further. I think that is political kryptonite for him. I continue to believe that the off-ramp to all of this is something that he proposed early on, even before he became Prime Minister, even before he was elected Prime Minister, and that is some sort of continental energy and security and prosperity pact with the United States.
Haven't heard much talk of that lately, have
No, that to me seems to be the off-ramp. It would involve perhaps changing his strategy on purchases of American military hardware, like the F-35. But we have to go in a different direction, clearly, than the direction we're going on in now. But maybe not. Like if any provincial premier, woe-betide any provincial premier outside of Alberta, I would say, who put U.S. booze back on the shelves. I think I know what most Canadians would do. All I have to do is look at the travel figures south of the border and see what's happened.
It's still plummeting.
Nobody seems to want to buy a condo in Florida. Every Canadian I seem to know down there has got theirs for sale.
Me too.
In Arizona, it's the same thing. We continue to, old people like me peer at small labels to make sure that we're not buying American, lemons and other produce. And so I don't know that there's anything to be gained either at the negotiating table or politically from continuing to backpedal.
Laura, you mentioned the premiers. Obviously, this comes at kind of an opportune time to all sit down and discuss it, because they will be in the same room together in Charlottetown in PEI this week, and the Prime Minister will join them on Thursday. Are you expecting the premiers to squawk about this? Are you expecting them to call for retaliation? Are you expecting them to say roll over? I mean, obviously it's a diverse group, so you might get different answers to this question. As we know, we've been following this all along. Ford believes one thing, Smith's saying another. But what do you think the general mood will be? Obviously, it won't be a good one, because a lot of these provinces are now facing potential tariffs of 50% on their products, things that we've studiously tried to avoid. How do you think this goes in the coming days? Because they will have a chance to hash it out and come up with a national plan to take this on.
Well, my answer to your first three questions is just yes, right? All of those disparate questions. Yes, he's going to hear all of that, depending on who he's talking to. They're absolutely going to hash it out. I think it is going to be a very tense meeting of the premiers and the Prime Minister this week, because this is, particularly for a handful of provinces, utter economic devastation if these happen, and complete industry devastation. We were talking about the auto sector earlier. That's not going to be the only one. Yeah. And so I think this is going to be a very tense discussion. I think there will be very disparate views about how these provinces, about how the Prime Minister should act. And I think we also have to layer on top of that, these aren't the only really big topics they have to discuss, right? Yeah. There's also Alberta separation. There's many, many challenges.
Making the exemption for energy and potash very important. I don't think it's a fluke that he's exempted energy. He knows, Trump knows, and the administration knows about the Alberta referendum.
Exactly. And that was where I was going, is we also have two provinces talking about separation. We have a resurging separation movement in Quebec where Dairy is very predominant. And we have Alberta. This is going to be a very tense meeting with very differing opinions. And I expect the readout to sound like that.
Kate, what are you expecting as they sit down in Charlottetown?
I think it'll be a lot of angling to be tough on Trump in front of the cameras, and a lot of, sir, you need to get to the bottom of this behind. And I would even just point to the last 2 weeks. Premier Ford, when in Alberta, had a public message for the Prime Minister that he was encouraging him to get back to the negotiation table. The sector tariffs are hurting a lot. It is made infinitely worse by today. So again, we can continue on with the tough talk and rhetoric and piecemeal caveats and carve-outs that have been pursued. It's not working. So I'm hoping that it's a big dose of reality for that meeting this week, that we need to change our approach fast, or else we are going to be having a whole suite of issues and problems to deal with in 30 days.
Robin, it's not just these new tariffs that are pending in 30 days. There's also this talk of a wildfire tariff, right? The president, again, threatening it last night, saying you're poisoning Canadian smoke from the wildfires is poisoning the U.S., threatening more tariff action in addition to what they've just imposed today. I mean, this is his tool, obviously. This is what he comes up with. You know, he turns to tariffs when things aren't going well. But we also saw Ohio Senator Bernie Moreno introduce legislation, or threatened to introduce legislation today, to punish Canada and officials, unnamed officials, for the wildfire smoke that's wafting into the U.S. Although I was reading weather reports today that it seems to be in a better condition in many states and many cities in the U.S. where this was an issue last week. But they're still hot to trot on punishing us for this. I mean, it just seems like we're at a very poor time in our relationship, right? I mean, we have Republicans now thinking that picking on Canada is a great way to distract from some of their own political issues. The war in Iran, the cost of living, the pending midterms where the outcome might not be what the president wants it to be. And what do they put in the window to kind of appeal to some of their voters? Let's take on Canada for a natural disaster that in many instances is well beyond their control. This relationship is not quite in tatters, but it might be at the lowest point I can ever remember, right? And probably you can ever remember. And today's actions, trade actions, really just makes it that much worse, doesn't it? How do you feel? I mean, you mentioned the boycotts. You mentioned people selling their real estate in Florida. Where does this go from here? Like, can we even really sit down and broker a new CUSMA and try and get those Section 232 tariffs lifted if we have people saying such negative things about us, torching the relationship, going after us on wildfires, you know, trying to put our industries out of business? How can you really sit down and negotiate a deal with someone who's treating you like that? You know, how can you really even stomach it?
Yeah, I think we need to draw a distinction between what might be some performative baffle-gab from the administration and the American people and the U.S. Congress, including members, Republican members of the Senate. I mean, I look at the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, and they lambaste an Ohio senator as well as President Trump for their assertions about the hot air and the smoky air that's coming from Canada. There was something interesting in what the president said, though, in terms of the timetable. He said that he doesn't remember it being bad as it has been in the last 3 or 4 years. And I think that he's absolutely right. There are fewer fires than there were 5 or 6 years ago.
There is, yeah.
But more land. Since 2022 in particular, more land, unprecedented, 6 times the national average. There are more severe storms and than ever before. I think there might also be something to, both in Canada and the United States, better forest management as well. Mm-hmm. I think that there is a lot of timber inside areas that are very difficult to get to that might be harvested, but we're going to have to build roads to do that. Yeah. I think everybody needs to understand that fire has always happened in Canada. It's worse now than it ever has been. The season is longer. It's neither good nor bad. In many ways, it's natural, but it's happening over greater swaths, and it's harder to get to. There are no roads
Right.
in a lot of the
Right.
boreal forests. You can't get there.
Well, they talk about forest management. It's like 75% of this country is forest, right?
Yeah.
And in some
Yeah.
of the most remote parts of the country, inaccessible by roads. You can't just sweep up the leaves, right?
Yeah.
They're sort of suggesting that's what should be done in this case.
And he also said during his discussion there at the steps of Air Force One at Andrews Air Force Base that he might be willing to help. Well, that would be a good sign. We help the Americans all the time. We lost a firefighter last week in Wisconsin, I believe.
Colorado, maybe?
That might be another off-ramp. Let's help each other out on what seems to be a crisis in both countries, I'd say.